I call on Professor John Maynard Smith to bring the main debate to its conclusion.
Madam President, for a simple soul like me from the South Coast, this has been a very odd debate. It started odd. It was posed by the honourable member from one of these colleges, who clearly should be sitting on this side of the room, asserting that the most bogus idea he'd ever heard of is an idea actually enshrined in at least a book by one of his main supporters, and I suspect by two of them. Namely the idea that the fossils all got sorted out by the flood. In the last speech we listened to, he announced that he wouldn't dare discuss theology on an occasion like this, when the speaker on his side immediately before him had discussed nothing else. But the honest thing about it is, as a matter of fact, that nobody on the other side of the House has actually argued for, positively, their own point of view, namely the validity of creation. Not one of them. And until the last speaker, for whom I have some respect, until the last speaker, not one of them argued about our point of view either. They were just too nervous of displaying themselves as being genuinely disbelievers in evolution to criticize it. And until the last speaker, who did criticize evolution, we had nothing to argue with. So all the argument is going to be left to me, it seems. Now, I might, I suppose, have expected that arguing for the validity of creation, they would have explained in some way or other how creation theory might explain, account for, or predict the kinds of things which we see in the natural world. I might have expected it. As a matter of fact, I didn't, because there's not a good reason. Creation theory can do no such thing. And let me explain why. If I announce, and in fact I will assert that the world was, as a matter of fact, created at 9 o'clock this morning. And we were all created with our memories and with the past and, navels and all that bit. There's no way you can refute that, and there is no observation that you could put before me which will make me even doubt it. Because I would say, well, that's just the way it was made. So, of course, the honourable member from New College, is it? I'm not sure. No, the gentleman on your right, who argued quite correctly, logically, with Richard Dawkins, that if it turns out that the sequence of amino acids in hemoglobin in apes and in man are identical, or other genes are identical, that doesn't prove common descent. He's, of course, formally quite right. It might be that they were both made at 9 o'clock this morning and God just felt like giving them the same sequence. Of course, it's possible. The point about that kind of creationism is that because it can explain absolutely anything, it can explain nothing. Any theory which is compatible with all facts is really not much use to us. Now, there is, however, and let me be fair here, a form of creation doctrine which does have some kind of predictive power, and it does explain things. I have rather a charming example with me that I brought along. It is the philosophical transactions giving some account of the present undertaking studies and labours of the ingenious in many considerable parts of the world. And it's for the years 17, 10, 11, and 12. And the paper is by Dr. John Arbuthnot, who, and it's entitled An Argument for Divine Providence, taken from the constant regularity observed in the birth of both sexes. And it actually is a very good paper. I have it, I use it in teaching, because it's the first known example known to me of a significant state of the literature. It's an interesting paper. But his basic thesis is that for by this means, he writes, it is provided that every male may have its female and of a proportionable age. I'm sorry, Madam President, but there's no mention of every female having its male at a proportional age. He seems to have had a slightly biased point of view on this. This is not the effect of chance, he says, but of divine providence working for a good end, which I now demonstrate. Now, the point of that, of course, is that if you hold the belief, first, that the Creator is peculiarly beneficent, and also that he created every detail, each species, each characteristic of the species, piece by piece, then indeed you can make predictions. The trouble is you're in dead trouble when you actually know as much about the world as we do today. You're lumbered with accounting for the AIDS virus. you're lumbered with accounting for children being born with spina bifida. And thinking religious people have realized that that's a nonsense. Any kind of, there may or may not be a divine creator, but he did not go out of his way to create the age. He did not take special trouble to make sure that some wretched child is born mentally deficient. Nobody believes, or nobody in their senses believes that. But that's where you're led to if you believe in a kind of point-by-point creation. So you're landed, if you're in a creation doctrine of a literal kind, really in one of two positions. Either you can explain nothing at all because you can explain it, or you're in the unfortunate position of having to try to explain the suffering and evil in the world, and you're really landed with a creator whom nobody could possibly regard as beneficent. Now, the point about evolution theory, but which Dr. Dawkins did try to account for, I think, in rather difficult circumstances, is that it does indeed predict features of the world. It does, as a matter of fact, predict the one-to-one sex ratio, for the very simple reason that in a world in which everybody has one father and one mother, which is still usually the arrangement, whichever is the rarer sex has more children. And consequently, the only evolutional and selective or stable state is to have equal numbers of both. It also, interestingly enough, accounts for the departures from the one-to-one sex ratio. There are many species of animal in which there may be as many as 10 times as many females as males. Now, as Bill Hamilton recently became a professor at this university, pointed out some years ago, that is precisely what you expect in species in which the offspring of one or a few females mate among themselves. And he was able to predict that, and in rather considerable detail, the kinds of sex ratios you'd expect to get, and show that, in fact, in precisely the situations you would predict, you do indeed get them. Now, you may say, well, that's all jolly trivial. And in a sense, it is trivial. It's a detail about the real world. My point is that evolution theory does predict those kinds of things. To take another example, a much less tragic and disastrous thing than the AIDS virus, but nevertheless something which can cause a good deal of discomfort and unhappiness in the world. When you get to my age, you often get pains in the lower back. I get pains in the lower back. And I find them unpleasant. There's a very simple reason. The bottom of my back is not badly designed, not straight. There's a curvature where it enters into the sacrum. If it was sensibly designed by a reasonable creator, it'd be straight. I wouldn't get lumbago. Why is it bent? Well, about 5 million years ago, perhaps rather more, 6 million years ago, my ancestors were walking about like this. And there was a right angle between their legs and their backbone. Now there's about, they're more or less in line. One of the ways that's been brought about, rather inefficiently, is reducing that curvature. There are all sorts of features of the world around you. All the time, if you're a biologist and look at it, you're seeing things which make sense if evolution happened, and make no sense whatever if it didn't. No sense whatever. However, there are, of course, difficulties with evolution theory. It would be an odd kind of theory if it had no difficulties to contend with, and I've lost my notes. What a terrible thing. Now I haven't finally get relaxed and all is well. I want, in fact, to turn to the other aspect. What criticisms have been made of evolution theory by people on the other side of the house? And as I say, basically, they were only made by the last speaker. Before I reply to those theories, I want to make one point quite clear. I understand the theory of evolution to be the theory originally formulated by Charles Darwin, namely the belief that all existing organisms are descended, ordinary processes of biological descent, from one or a few common ancestors. Darwin himself knew he could not explain the origin of those first ancestors, he could not explain the origin of life. I regard the problem of the origin of life as still an unsolved problem. However, I would hasten to urge those of you on that side of the house who regard the unsolved nature of the problem of the origin of life as something you can hang on to keep your faith. Don't do it. Before you're very much older, it's going to be solved. Really, you'd be mad to say, I believe because scientists can't explain the origin of life. things are moving very fast in that field. I don't think the problem is solved, but you'd be crazy to pin your faith to it. Crazy. However, I'm not going to argue about the origin of life. I don't think the problem is solved. I can think of all sorts of difficulties with it. The question is whether evolution of the kind that Darwin proposed actually is a possibility. And the last speaker, Dr. Wilder Smith's primary argument was, I believe, that you can't get information except from some intrinsic source into the living system. And because you can't get information there, you can't have life. Now, I think this is just simply empirically false. Empirically, experimentally false. Let me describe two experiments which show it to be false. Information in biological systems, and I'm sure we agree about this, is fundamentally stored in the sequence of bases in nucleic acid, either RNA or DNA. Secondly, of course, not any old sequence counts as information. The sequence must have some specific properties that enables the molecule to do something, to code, or either to do something in itself, or to code for proteins that do something. The first experiment I want to describe to you was originally, I think, actually performed by somebody that Wilder Smith mentioned, namely Sol Spiegelman. These are the famous experiments in which you study the evolution of RNA molecules in vitro. Just have a test tube, no living organisms there, nothing like that. You have the bases from which RNA is synthesized, and you have an enzyme which will polymerize them. And the reason why this is in no sense an explanation of the origin of life is that you do have to put an enzyme in there. That's why it doesn't explain the origin of life. However, it now turns out that no matter what you seed that thing with, any old RNA sequence you like, and it can be very short, it can be sort of 4 or 5 bases, and there are those who say you don't have to seed it at all, but that's still controversial, so I won't raise that. But seed it with any short molecule, and then allow natural selection between those molecules to go on in the test tube. Because they mutate, you see, they don't always copy themselves perfectly. And some of them get replicated quicker than others. After about 100 transfers, you'll finish up with one unique sequence. It's about 235 bases long, and it's always the same, within 1 or 2. Now, the odds against that arising, quotes by chance, are 4 to the 230, 1 in 4 to the 235. That's an immense number. Your typewriter could be hammering away since, you know, the bottom of the Cambrian, and you wouldn't have got anywhere near it. It's wildly unlikely, but it happens in the lab in about 2 days. Because natural selection doesn't operate by simply trying one by one a series of molecules until at last, bingo, it hits the sun. It hill climbs. It makes a series of changes one by one, each of which is an improvement on the one before. And it gets there, and it does it. You don't have to do the mathematics because you can do it in the lab. The other, Dr. Wilder Smith said that if you want to get E. coli to make insulin, you'd have to take an insulin gene, bung it into the E. coli, and then, of course, the E. coli would make insulin. That's perfectly correct. However, you can get E. coli. E. coli is a bacterium, Escherichia coli. I won't spell it. You can get E. coli to make a new enzyme with a new function that does something useful for the beast it couldn't do before by natural selection in the laboratory. Patricia Clark, who was at college with me, as a matter of fact, we were all girls together, so to speak, did precisely this experiment at University College with the amides. You can start off with E. coli that can make amides which will split 3-carbon amides but not 4 or 5. And after selection, you get point mutations, which you can later identify. You can show where they were. You can sequence the thing. You can show that after a period of selection, you have got a bacterium with an enzyme which can do something which it couldn't do before. It's got new information. Natural selection will, in fact, put information into molecules. Now, I gather that it's terribly important to get to the bar on time, so let me just finish very briefly, if I may, with a personal note. I've, I suppose, spent my life studying evolution. If
possible, I might just say a clarifying word to that. I would believe, of course, that you can reshuffle information to have the same informational content, but which will produce, say, new enzymes to do particular jobs. What I did very specifically mention is that this sort of mechanism which you've produced, which you've suggested, will not produce the type of evolutive speciation necessary to produce the whole gamut from amoeba to man. You can shuffle around and produce new species on the same informational level. You can change things around that way, but you can't get the thing to fall up the ladder.
I'm terribly sorry. That does seem to be simply to show you do not actually understand information theory. Information is precisely the sequence in which things happen in a sequence, and all you can do with it is to shuffle. I mean, there's nothing else you can do with information except shuffle it, and that's what we have done.
No.
Who do?
No.
Information is in the sequence, is it not?
May I,
Change
madam?
After the
Change
order speaker, when they wish to recognise.
Yes, I would specifically, and I made great efforts to show you that I do believe that you can change one species into another, but that's not evolutive speciation. I don't think that you could coax an Escherichia coli by your method to produce human insulin. That's what I'm getting.
Look, it's something to have got you to say that you can change one species into another. I did not hear you say that earlier. And I don't believe you did you? I didn't hear it. Perhaps I was sleeping. I do not believe you said earlier you can change one species into another. You can take A into B, then you can change B into C, and C into D, and you can change any one species into any other one given millions of years. So we're home. We really have nothing left to argue about. It's great. Let me just briefly conclude. I've spent my life studying evolution, and looking back on it, I find that there are, in fact, three major problems which I've thought about during these years. They weren't deliberately chosen when I was a young man, they're just what I happened to have worked on. They are the evolution of senescence, the evolution of conventional behavior in animals, and the evolution of sex. And looking back on it, there's a common core. The reason is quite simple. It is that each of them present a challenge to Darwin. None of those things are quite what a simple-minded Darwinist might expect. Senescence, why would you grow old? I mean, you produce more offspring, you are Darwinian, you're fitter, you don't die, so why die? Why behave conventionally if selection should produce nature red in tooth and claw? Why sex, when a female who had the good sense not to bother with males and produce daughters like herself would produce twice as many as if she wastes her time having sons? Each of these presents very real problems because they're universal features of the world and they're puzzling features. Now, I don't claim that I've solved all those three. I would expect an immediate invitation from Stockholm if I'd have solved any one of them, I suspect. But I do assert that each of those problems is nearer to solution today than it was 30 years ago when I started working with biology. And indeed, the two of them, the problem of conventional behavior and the problem of senescence, are, I believe, in their essence solved. Though I don't claim to have been the major person to have solved them, I think I have contributed. And I've done so because I've worked within a scientific theory which does help to explain the natural world. During that time, what have creation scientists done? They have grubbed through the literature of people like myself, searching for contradictions, searching for places where I disagree with him, or he disagrees with me, searching for difficulties in other people's work so they can say, oh, looky, isn't it all awkward?
I would just like to comment, Madam Chairman, that this evening we have seen a demonstration of one side searching through the literature of the other side to refute it, but not providing any positive.
A point of information should be in the form of a question.
Perhaps I should remark that there was a very real reason why that had to be done. The reason it had to be done was that your side of the House, until the last speech, was not in fact coming out in its true colours and saying what it believed. And I think it was entirely excusable to do that, though I did not, as a matter of fact, myself do it.
I regret, Madam President, that this debate has developed into a series of personal attacks, and I just want to remind those present that on our side of the House there has not been a single personal attack on the other side, whereas in the reverse direction we have seen a constant stream of innuendo and accusation.
With due respect, sir, as I pointed out, we only allow points of information. There are also points of order, and I do not believe this is a point of order. Therefore, may I please ask you to resume your seats so that Professor Maynard Smith may continue with his speech.
I need, Madam Chairman, only one more minute. I believe that what this evening you have to decide, in deciding between the validity of the doctrine of creation or the theory of evolution, is which of these methods of approach have added most to our understanding of the natural world during recent years. If you believe that, as I do, that evolutionary biologists, even if they have not solved all their problems, have really added to our knowledge and to our understanding of the world, whereas creation scientists have added virtually nothing to our understanding of the world, then you will oppose the motion. Thank you, Madam Chairman.